Welcome to our third session on effective Bible teaching. Remember, our goal is to learn how to communicate one main message from a biblical text in a way that your learners can understand, remember, and apply it to their lives. Last time, we saw how the first stage of understanding the text for ourselves is through observing it. This is the first of the 3 steps of the process known as Inductive Bible Study. This week, we will move on to a brief overview of how you might begin to interpret a text. Of course, biblical interpretation is a massive topic, but in this short time, I hope to put a couple of tools in your workman's belt that are going to help you a lot. So, the first essential step is to ask questions of the data you've gathered. We're going to demonstrate this by looking back at our thingamabob and the data that we gathered on it. Interpretive questions focus on what seems either meaningful or unclear. Usually interpretive questions start with why, how, so what, or what does it mean? So, if I look at my thingamabob, I might ask questions like this. Why is there such a big suction cup on the bottom? Why are there spikes? And why are there several sharp edges here, here, and here? And what is their purpose? And why does the handle turn towards the sharp edges? Or away from it, depending which way you turn it. Now, notice that some questions will work together. For example, one of my questions about the thingamabob explores the connection between the spikes, the spiral turning handle, and the sharp edges here on the far side. So, having asked these questions, we can begin now to come up with some possibilities. The big suction cup. Perhaps that meant to anchor this thing to a hard surface, which means this needs to stay steady as it works. And the spikes are meant to hold something in place, something with weight because of the suction cup. And the handle turns whatever is stuck on the spikes towards the sharp edges, so these sharp edges must be meant to cut whatever is turning toward them. And plus, the thing to be fixed on the spikes is not too hard, like wood, or the spikes wouldn't push in, but it's not too soft either, like dough, or it wouldn't stay on the spikes, it would just fall off. So, from asking and connecting these questions, we can start to make a good interpretation. This thingamabob is made for the purpose of cutting something that is firm but not hard, and it appears that it cuts it in a special spiral pattern. Now let's look at the verse in 2 Timothy that we've been studying. I'll just read it back over for you. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. We can ask the same kinds of questions about things that seem either meaningful or unclear of the text data here as we did about our thingamabob. For example, why might we be ashamed? And how is it that God approves us instead? Or what does the text mean by do your best? Or what does the word worker mean in the original language? Or how do we correctly handle the word of truth? What does this mean? Now, we may already be able to draw some conclusions and reject other ones based on other data in the text itself, just like we did with the thingamabob. For example, we can already say from our observation that whether we are approved by God or ashamed before Him has to do with doing our best to correctly handle the word of truth. So that actually mostly answers the first 2 questions, though they might still need more fleshing out. But other questions might need further data in order to be answered well, from data from outside the text itself. These interpretive questions may also be important when you come to craft discussion questions for your learners in helping them explore for themselves the meaning of the text. The second essential step is to closely examine the scriptural and historical context. When it comes to biblical interpretation, context is king. I used to have a professor that said that. So looking at the surrounding scripture and knowing the historical context is the best guide for us to correctly interpret a text. There are several different levels to the scriptural context. This includes the paragraphs and the verses that surround the target text, and we call this the immediate context. But it also includes the chapter or story or section of the book in which it is set. And it further includes the general themes of the book in which it appears. Closely examining the context will often keep us from what we call proof texting, or just jerking something out of context. Do you remember that story I told you about my Bible teacher who said that the meaning of the commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes, was that girls shouldn't wear dark eye makeup? Now, he just took that out of context. If he'd truly thought about the context, it would have been clear to him that the entire psalm is about the power of God's revelation and specifically his word to transform our inner lives, not just to watch out what we smear on our faces. Let's look at the context of 2 Timothy 2:15. So first, the immediate context, the verses that come just before and after. Here they are. Keep reminding God's people of these things. Warn them before God against quarreling about words. It is of no value and only ruins those who listen. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. Avoid godless chatter, because those who indulge in it will become more and more ungodly. Their teaching will spread like gangrene. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have departed from the truth. They say that the resurrection has already taken place, and they destroy the faith of some. So looking at this, clearly the immediate context contrasts with the approved workman who correctly handles the word of truth. And it contrasts it with quarreling about words and godless chatter. It also contrasts sharply with false teachers, these two guys whose names are almost unpronounceable, who lead people astray. It seems that Paul is saying that these guys, these false teachers, are the ones who should be ashamed before God of what they're doing. So this information sharpens our answers to some of the questions we asked earlier about how we correctly handle the word of truth by showing us the opposite. Next, we're going to explore the section context. If we read through the chapter as a whole, we can see that Timothy is being encouraged to stay true to the gospel he learned from Paul as he entrusts the message to others to pass on, and also to reflect this steadfastness in his way of life. Let's look at a few of the things Paul says in this chapter. You then, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. Verse 2. And the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will be also qualified to teach others. Verse 19. God's solid foundation stands firm, sealed with this inscription, the Lord knows those who are his, and everyone who confesses the name of the Lord must turn away from wickedness. Verse 24. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. So now, from looking at this larger context of the chapter, we can confirm that the command we observed earlier was indeed given to Timothy, but that it is meant to be passed on to reliable people, those who are also the Lord's servants who are able to teach. So that sounds like that means us. We are also in a long line of people to whom Paul's teaching about Jesus has been entrusted from Timothy on down. So we can take this command as our own. We also have some more positive information about what it looks like to correctly handle the word of truth, including faithfulness to the gospel and a kind, calm, peace-loving nature. So that's the section context, but finally, we would look at the book context. Now, you won't always have time to read the whole book to analyze its themes, so you can cheat a bit here by looking them up. I actually looked at the introduction to 2 Timothy on BibleGateway.com, which stated this as the theme of the book. Facing imminent death, Paul encourages Timothy to carry on the ministry and to faithfully guard the gospel. Now, looking at this, it reinforces the interpretations we've already seen from the immediate context. And having considered the theme of the book, now leads us into the second step of looking at context, which is considering the historical context of the book. This includes three main aspects: historical setting, physical setting, and cultural context. So first, the historical setting. In this aspect, we're looking at what else is happening at the time. So in a narrative passage, this includes what's happening around and about the setting for that particular episode, or in a teaching, what was the occasion for it to be given? And we might also ask, what is the occasion for writing this book? Now, this might be the same as the first question, but it could be different because a book may be written for a different audience of people than the story is about or to whom the teaching is given. For example, the episodes in the Gospel of Luke happened among the Jews, but the book itself was written to Gentile believers. Now, both the historical setting and the occasion of 2 Timothy 2 can be found by reading an introduction to the book, like we saw before. Facing imminent death in a dark dungeon, Paul writes to Timothy, now pastor of the church Paul planted in Ephesus, encouraging him to carry on the ministry and to faithfully guard the gospel. Knowing that this is Paul's final letter, his last will and testament, and that he is entrusting to him his most beloved son in the faith, Timothy, this adds a gravitas to this verse and a solemnity to his command to handle the word well. The second part of the historical context is examining the physical context of the text. This includes both geographical settings and also biological or natural references that are important to its interpretation. Now, for these, you might need to consult an outside source, such as a Bible dictionary or an encyclopedia, to find out what is the significance for the time when they were written, rather than imposing our own modern meanings on them. Now, geographical settings might be important because the kind of terrain or weather they represent, how that impacts the text, or because of their political or religious implications, or for any number of other reasons. Often, you will have noted these in the where section of your observations, and you can follow these up with a little bit of research. In the case of 2 Timothy 2:15, you might remember that we didn't note any where elements, so this is probably not particularly important. Biological and natural references such as animals, plants, or minerals like salt may also be important because of their contemporary meaning to the characters or audience of the biblical text. Again, if these occur in your text, you would have noted them in your what observations. But looking back at 2 Timothy 2:15, we can see that neither of the whats that we noticed in this section were either biological or natural. However, we do have an interpretive question about the term a worker, which leads us to the third part of our historical context exploration. This is the cultural context of the text. This is where we tune our ears to what cultural references people at the time would have taken in as they experienced this story or as they heard this teaching. So, thus for our text, what cultural picture of a worker would have come into people's minds here? What was their immediate picture? I'm going to have to look up this Greek word if I want to know this. Now, we've been trying to do, up to this point, mostly our own work, but as I already mentioned, some of these aspects may be able to be found in the text or other books of the Bible, and others may be found in other books of the Bible, but some may need further research outside the Bible in a Bible dictionary or handbook. Notice I did not say a commentary. That would be giving up. Try coming to your own conclusions for just a little while longer before you do that. Remember what I said? When it comes to interpretation, context is king. So often, just putting the text into context, whether it's scriptural or historical, will make the interpretation much, much clearer. Let's try this with a thingamabob. Let's see where I got it. If I put it right here, suddenly we realize Here is something that is firm and moderately heavy and could be stuck on the spikes and cut by the thingamabob. And we are ready to venture an interpretation. Could it be that the thingamabob was made to cut apples into spirals? These two steps, asking questions and looking at the context, are the most basic in interpretation. Your basic exercise actually is going to involve this, but there are many other ways to dig deeper without resorting to consulting commentaries. I'm going to give you 4 of them. The first is looking at other biblical texts with similar or contrasting themes. An easy way to do this is via cross-references. You can turn these on in Bible Gateway settings, or you can also look these up in a topical Bible like Nave's Topical Bible. This is available on blueletterbible.org as well. If you're studying the Gospels, you can also look at a harmony of the Gospels, which allows you to see parallel passages and also the sequence of the entire story. This is also available on blueletterbible.org. A second additional way to dig into the passage is by applying special genres guidelines for the genres that we mentioned. As we talked about in our observation step, different genres require slightly different approaches, and it's helpful to keep these in mind. I'm not going to explain all this here, but I've made a downloadable document of guidelines for various genres available to you on our Facebook group. This is also true for figurative language. A third thing to dig into is applying special guidelines for figurative language. Now, we say we don't take the Bible literally, we take it naturally, which means we take it at its natural meaning, which means it's sometimes literal and sometimes figurative. That's natural. But how do you determine which is which? Normally, the natural meaning is the literal meaning, unless that does not make sense or if it would contradict other clearer scriptures. So in this case, you can try to figure out what kind of figure of speech is being used. And I've also made a downloadable document of guidelines for various figures of speech that is available to you on our Facebook group. The final way that I'm going to mention to you to dig in is by doing word studies. This is when you look at how a keyword is defined in the original language and how it is used in other places in Scripture. Here's an example from our 2 Timothy text. When I looked up the word for correctly handling, that's one word in Greek, I found out it means to cut straight. This is the only time this specific word was used in the New Testament, but it was also used in the Old Testament Septuagint Greek translation for "He will make your paths straight" in Psalm 119. So this straight cutting is a contrast with the false teachers who have departed, or in another word, swerved away from the truth. And I also did look up that word worker. I found it interesting that a workman means a laborer, usually an agricultural laborer, so that the picture that is being painted here is of a plowman plowing a straight furrow in a field. The advanced exercise for this session involves a simple word study if you choose to do it. You know, after you've done all of this, you may still find that there are some things that are unclear. There are a little bit that you still have some questions about. This is the time that you may want to now go ahead and consult some experts who know more than you do. And some passages, this is going to be, there are some passages that are just difficult. And so, like for example, with my thingamabob here, I wonder, I figured out that this is probably to slice apples, but what is this blade for? I haven't figured that out yet. So if I go to an outside source, I might find the box. And the box says that it is an apple, it's an apple slicer, just like I thought. And it also, that middle round thing, will take the core out of the apple, and it's an apple peeler. So now I know that from looking at an outside source, that my 3 blades are going to not only slice the apple in a spiral, but also to core it and to peel it. Now, biblical interpretation can be quite demanding. But you will find that as you do your best to apply yourself to correctly handling the word of truth, that the truth of Psalm 19:8 comes alive in your own soul. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. May you also have light and joy as you uncover God's glory in His Word. Our exercises today, as you might have guessed, have to do with interpretation. The basic exercises will be those two steps that we talked about. First of all, asking good interpretive questions, and secondly, exploring the context, both the scriptural context and the historical context. We're going to give you some guidelines for that to make it not too complicated, and to use some of your own background knowledge as well as what's there already in the immediate scriptural context. The advanced exercise this session is to do a word study. So if you choose to do that, we will help you find where you need to go for that as well. And of course, post online, answer some questions, comment on some others' questions. We would love to interact with you. May the Lord bless you richly as you become an even more effective student and teacher of His Word.